In this lesson, we'll use the Poly Extrude tool to shape out our tire and wheel assembly. So we're going to pick up right where we left off with the last class. We've started with this circle, and the circle is here right in the correct spot. We've got the correct number of divisions as well. So let's go ahead and start to extrude this circle. Now, we're going to lay down the extrude node, and when we access the tool and the handles, we'll start to talk a little bit more in depth about what it actually is doing. Now, in order to lay down the extrude tool, you can access it several different ways. We're going to access it using the tab or right-click menu. So for me, I'm just going to hit tab on the keyboard. That'll bring up the tab menu. And all I need to do is type out the letters P-O-L, and it starts to give me all of the tools that I can use when I'm working with polygons and modeling. Now, the one that I want to choose is the Poly Extrude, and it's right here. Now, there's another tool here that can get confusing. If you start to look for the Extrude tool, it's important to note that there's actually an Extrude tool. Now, this is something that's used in a completely different sense. What we want to use is that Poly Extrude tool. And that's primarily because the type of surface that we're working on is a polygon. And I know that by having my circle node highlighted here inside of the network view and looking at the primitive type in the parameters view. Now, this primitive type tells me that I can create many different types of surfaces to work with inside of Houdini. For now, we're working with polygons, so we'll want to stick to using the Poly Extrude tool. So again, I've laid down my node so that I can access the Poly Extrude, and now I need to connect them up. Just click on the little nubby for wire, come down, and you'll see it sort of highlight whenever you get close. You'll want to hook it into the first input of the Poly Extrude. And we'll discuss what the second input is used for here in a minute, but just make sure that you hook it up to the first input on the left. And now let's move our handle down from the circle, or I'm sorry, our flag down from the circle to the Poly Extrude node, so that the display flag in the viewport is going to show us the results of what we do with this Poly Extrude. So let's start to talk about the Poly Extrude. Now, the first thing that you'll notice here is that you have this handle for the Poly Extrude, and all that it is just a straight line. Of course, you can click on that straight line and you can drag. You can push it forwards and backwards, and that's really about all that that tool will let you do right off the bat. But it's important that we understand exactly what's happening here. What's happening is that the Poly Extrude tool actually duplicates whatever the source is that's input. And by that I mean, since we have the circle plugged into this tool, it's duplicating that original circle, and then it basically moves it a distance away from itself. That's what we're defining here. So there's like the shape and position of the original circle, and we're just duplicating that circle, scooting it away from its original position. And then we're filling in the gaps in between with more geometry. So this becomes a little bit more important when we start working with some of the other elements here inside of the Poly Extrude. But what you really need to understand is that all that it is a simple tool that duplicates the input geometry, in our case the circle, scoots it away from its original source, and then fills up the distance with more geometry. Now, all of these options here inside of the parameter view give you different ways of manipulating either the position or the duplicate itself, or the way in which this geometry is built that bridges the gap between those two pieces of geometry, that source and the one that's offset. So let's go ahead and come back and click on our Poly Extrude. Oops, excuse me there, I right-clicked. So we'll click on the Poly Extrude, make sure that our display flag is moved down. And that's a little bit far. Let's move it out just, just about that far. Now keep in mind, it's always handy to have your reference footage available. Since this is kind of what we're modeling after, it's nice to be able to look at this every now and then and kind of see exactly what we're doing. So this is the piece that we're at right now. We've sort of made this first move, which gives us this position here. So the next thing we really want to do is sort of extrude again, and it looks like that circle's a little bit larger this time. And then we extrude a distance away from it again, only the next time it's much, much larger. So let's work on those moves next. So in order to do a second extrusion, what we need to do is actually lay down another poly extrude node here in the network view. Now there's a couple of ways of doing that as well. The easiest way is the way that you already know, just to hit the tab menu and start typing out again poly extrude, and you can find it here from the list. Click and lay down another one. So let's do that for right now. We'll connect this back up again using the first input of the poly extrude, the node on the left, or the little connector on the left. So from one poly extrude just into another one here. Move our display flag down to the next poly extrude, and we'll bring it out just a little bit. Oh, actually, it's doing something a little bit strange here, isn't it? Well, let's talk about what's going on there. The thing that's happening is what we had selected when we added this new poly extrude, the position of that circle where it was connected is causing a little bit of confusion with what we're seeing here in the viewport. So in order to make sure that we're extruding the correct thing and in the right way, in the way that we want, the easier way to actually lay down duplicate nodes in a row like this is to just use the Q menu. So really, the Q shortcut. It's not even a menu. All you need to do is make sure that you have your poly extrude selected. We'll come over here, use our select tool to grab the face that we want to duplicate, offset, and fill, or extrude here. So we've got it selected. And now I'm just going to type Q on the keyboard. And as soon as I do, Houdini automatically lays down the node that I was just working with, which was the poly extrude, so it duplicates that previous node, and it applies it just to the group that I had selected in the viewport, which was that one face, face number 0. So anytime inside of this group dialog box that you see numbers listed here, what it's referring to is which polygon are you applying this tool to. In our case, you can see that by turning on face numbers, which you can do here on the right-hand side toolbar. I'm just going to go ahead and click on this icon. It's the third one from the bottom in my case. And if I turn it on, you'll see that these little numbers show up. So each polygon that's been created is identified by a unique number. In our case, the one that we wanted to extrude was polygon number 0. So we're only extruding polygon 0. Now if we begin to move, we can see that we're actually just pulling out polygon 0. As soon as we move that away from its source, you'll notice all of these new polygons are generated and all given a unique number. Now, we want to offset that just a little bit and now make the much bigger extrusion, which will be sort of our transition to this larger area of the drum brake here. So since I've got that already selected from the last time, you might have noticed that it was polygon 0, and as soon as we made the extrude and pulled out, that it became polygon 16. So we'll give it just a little bit here. Now I want to duplicate that procedure again, and I'm just going to use the Q shortcut. I like to think of it as a quick way of accessing the same tool I just used. That's how I remember that it's Q, because it's just quick to do that. So I'm just going to type Q again. That will automatically lay out a new poly extrude, but notice what's different here in the parameters. The group that it's been applied to is now 16, because number 16 was that face from before. Now watch, as soon as I move this in any way, shape, or form, watch what happens. Polygon 16 has now become 32. Okay, so now that we've got that made, what we need to do is to make that larger. That actual next circle needs to be a little bit larger and represent the size of the brake drum. So how do we get that? Well, let's offset it just a minor amount from the previous one here. I'm going to use just about, what is this, 0.015, somewhere in there in the distance. And what I want to do now is have the ability to enlarge or rotate or translate that second circle that we duplicated. So remember, the way extrusion works is you start with that first shape, you duplicate it, you move it somewhere, then fill in the gaps. So what we're going to do now is change where that guy is. So there's a particular thing you have to do, though, to enable that option inside of the poly extrude tool. What you need to do is to enable this transform extruded front. Now, this is why I kind of explained it the way I did. What we're going to do is apply a transform, a scale, rotate, move, whatever, to that front circle that we've created and duplicated. So as soon as I hit that, notice that my handle tool in the viewport becomes much more complicated. Instead of just a straight line allowing me to move in position, I now have the ability to rotate that object that's been duplicated. I can move it around in a lot of different ways. I can move it in different directions now. And I can even scale it. Now, to access the scaling option, all I need to do is remember the shortcut that we used to toggle through the tools was Y on the keyboard. So if I just tap Y, I now get sort of a scale tool that will allow me to scale that circle. So I'm just moving, transforming, and rotating that secondary circle. Now, I don't really want this in this position. I just wanted to show you how to get to those different tools. So let's do Control Z. We'll scoot it back just a little bit. I did tap Y, which will cycle me through the options I have here, the move, rotate, and scale. And since I want to scale it up, I'm just going to grab my scale handle and we'll enlarge that a little bit to about the size that we want our brake drum. Take a quick look at our reference. Okay, that's about right. It's just about half the distance of the size of the wheel, so that's about right. And we'll go ahead and let it play so we can see the front side of it here. All right, and then we're going to come way back in and make a little small hub here in the front. So it looks like we've got a couple of different divisions to give it some thickness there. So we'll go back and make that. Again, I've already got my poly extrude here, so I just want to use my selection tool. Make sure that I have that front face selected and highlighted. Just tap Q. That allows me to extrude it, give it a little bit of thickness. I'll do it one more time. That'll let me extrude it one more time. And now I'm going to shrink it back in a little bit. So I want to transform the extruded front here in the parameters view. There's my scale option. So I'm going to bring that down. And I'm going to scoot it back just a little bit. Now remember, inside of the scale handle tool, whenever you see it, you have this nice little micro move tool here inside. So we can grab that and just sort of scoot it back a bit. Let's do one more extrusion. So press Q again. That'll give you that last extrusion. And we'll pull in that brake hub to give it just a little bit of that front face so that the center of the wheel has a little bit more going on there. So now that we've got our hub created, our sort of brake hub, let's go ahead and start modeling out the tire. And that's where we'll begin in the next lesson.